Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Steve Cutler helps people and organizations evolve to higher levels. As a coach and consultant, Steve has helped hundreds of people and businesses improve processes and protocols that have led to skyrocketing performance. With over 20 years in health, fitness, tech, and entrepreneurial ventures, Steve brings a strong background in operations, marketing, sales, and financial performance. Currently, Steve runs Evolve, a lifestyle clothing, coaching, and consulting business. Steve is the host of the Evolve podcast that has been downloaded in over 20 countries in just over 10 months. In addition to Evolve, Steve currently leads the marketing for Udo, a tech startup in Utah's Silicon Slopes. Most important, Steve is a proud husband and father of 3 beautiful, smart, and amazing kids. Steve has had a massive impact in my personal and professional life. He believed in me enough to hire me and has taught me tons of leadership skills that have stuck with me to this day. He was instrumental in helping me own and embrace my unique area of passion in the low carbohydrate space, and it is an honor to welcome him to the show today. Steve Cutler, such an honor to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thanks, man. I don't think that last part was something that we wrote down, so that was a bit of a curveball, but thank you.
Absolutely. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. You were somebody who has been very influential in my life and the direction my career was taking. I was kind of getting like painted into a corner, I feel like, with nutrition because I started enjoying low carbohydrate diets and they started to work for people, and I didn't want to be known as that guy. Like, people were calling me Keto Casey, and I didn't want to be that guy. And I remember very distinctly having the conversation with you and saying, like, what should I do? And you're like, dude, just own it, run with it, and embrace it. And it's really been very influential in my career. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I love you and all that you do, and am inspired by you. And it's really cool to watch what's happened as you have embraced that. And it doesn't mean that you are now, just a low carb guy. Because you have such a wealth of knowledge. I mean, I love your podcast. I love all the different people that you have on. I learn a lot. Those that may not know our friendship will know that I'll text you several times a week and say, hey, I love this episode. This was really cool. So you're doing a great thing here, and it's very inspirational.
Well, thanks, man. That really means a lot coming from you. I love your podcast as well. It's one of the podcasts that I can count on one hand where I never miss an episode, and you do a great job interviewing really interesting guests. During the pandemic, I learned about myself that I'm a lot more, introverted than I thought. And having the chance to pause and decide like which relationships I wanted to bring back in my life, I thought I loved a lot of people, and I really enjoy the depth of a relationship with very few people. And you and I meet once a month in person to have some of the best sourdough and avocado toast that I've ever had, and we have very engaging and interesting conversations. And then it's just you and I think have a relationship that I love the intentionality behind it, and I love keeping that relationship in my life. It's really great.
Yeah, it's one of the that I treasure the most. And I think back to probably 2 months ago, we were sitting at the coffee shop and we're eating and talking, and we get into our conversation. We're probably hour and a half, 2 hours in, and realizing that we probably had a few other things to do for that day. And you looked up and you're like, holy shit, look at this. And we looked around and we didn't even know that there were so many people in the coffee shop that were there, because we go first thing, right, when they open. And then, and so we're amazed by the fact that other people are around, right? And then you point out and you're like, look at that shit over there. And there's a group of people, 4 or 5 people sitting at a table together, and every single one of them is on their phone. And so when you talk about that intentionality, and I think what makes our friendship so great is we can literally sit there and chat and not even be aware that the restaurant has filled up around us, and that some dumbasses sitting at a table right next to us are supposedly doing the same thing that we are, right? Going out as friends and connecting, but at the end of the day, they're just staring at the screen rather than really connecting with each other.
It's so strange. It's just so strange to observe. And it happens all the time. It's crazy. I mean, the amount of times that you and I have got together and really solved a lot of the world's problems and nobody listens to us.
Yes.
You know, part of doing that was actually starting a book club with your co-host, W. Miles Riley. And we would meet up once a month at your place and we would, you know, have read a book, some of which I actually did read. And we would, you know, just pick through the book and talk about ideas and solve the world's problems. I really think we did an amazing job with that book club, but I have to ask, would you consider it a book club with a wine problem or more of a wine club with a book problem?
That's a great question. I'll plead the fifth on that one.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Well, I wanted this episode to be really special and unique. So I'm actually changing the format just a little bit. The questions that I have for you today have already been written out, and I've tried to craft them as best I could to elicit really interesting answers, which I know you'll be great at. And so I'm actually just going to read some of these questions to you. Here are your answers. We can dive down some rabbit holes if we like. We might not get to all the questions, but you just have had such an interesting life and have done so many things. I'd really love to learn some of your insights. So the first question for you, what is the most impactful book you have ever read?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, I've read so many that have made a difference in my life. It would be hard for me to just narrow it down to one. So I'd probably would say what is one that's the most recent? And I think probably the most recent in the last few years that has been the most impactful has been James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. And I guess why it's been so impactful is I love the fact that Clear talks about in there a system and a process for starting small to create something big. You know, I believe that all of us have the ability to make a significant impact in life if we figure out who the hell we are and then we lean into what it is that we're great at. But most people, number one, never dig deep enough to get to that point. And then number two, don't have a plan or a process to bring that out of them. So I think Clear's book is phenomenal because he helps you to identify if you have this vision for your life or you have this goal that you want to accomplish, how do you break it down and just start really small? You know, for someone that, let's say, wants to get in better shape, it's not about getting this badass workout in where you're sweating from head to toe and you got so much swoob that somebody could drink it off of you. It's about just saying, okay, I'm not exercising, so I'm going to start showing up at the gym. And you do that, and that's all you commit to is just showing up. You can walk through the door, you can walk back out. And then over time, you grow that goal into maybe you're going to show up and you're going to go up onto the fitness floor. Or you show up and you're going to get on a treadmill for 5 minutes. And little by little, you develop these habits and you stack the habits. And I believe that's how you create a great life. It's not about doing something big. It's about doing something small consistently, and then building on it.
That's a great answer. That's so funny you mentioned that. I actually finished that book for the first time last week. And you're right. Like it's really very practical, different than some of the other habit books that I've read. I love how he highlights the 4 stages of habit: the cue, the craving, the response, the reward, and, you know, making things easy, making things attractive. I think it's a really practical way to change your habits. And he does such a great job being really concise with his words. And it's also funny too, his team responded to my email to be on our podcast, and he politely declined, but that was just this morning. So funny that you mentioned him, and I guess he's not going to be on the show.
Well, not yet anyways. I mean, he might down the road, but yeah, he does a great job. I think one of the things that when I first started reading books for development and growth, and I've always been a reader. I've always liked reading, but I got into stuff that over the years I find is, you know, 90+% of it is wasteful. It's good. It's flowery. There's, you know, interesting concepts. But what I have observed over the years is there's a very small percentage of what I read that I actually apply and it actually works. And with Atomic Habits, there's nothing in that book that to me is fluff. You know, everything that I've taken and I've applied, it actually works. And I love things that work. I love things that are not just there for the sake of being there, especially in the education or the development realm.
Yeah. I agree.
So he's not just creating content to create content. He's creating content that really, people can use and they can improve their lives.
Yeah. Clear is just such a perfect name for his writing style.
Yeah, that's true.
One thing I've started doing recently that has helped, because I find the same thing, like I'll consume content and then like automatically like forget about it, is I think I stole this from Greg McKeown, but I will sit down with as much intention as possible and just write down for maybe 10 minutes some of the key concepts of that book. And that has helped me to retain a little bit. Do you do any of that? Like, do you take notes or anything when you're reading a book?
Yeah, so I actually do it a little bit different now than I used to. I was very analog in the way that I would do things in the past. I'd highlight or I'd write notes or I'd keep a notebook with me. And a few years ago, I had a job where I was traveling every other week and sometimes every week. And so typical of my life, I wanted to simplify as much as possible. I wanted to get rid of as much of the junk as I didn't need. And so as I started traveling, I think when you do anything new, you tend to overdo, and I would take way too much stuff. And then I'm like, I don't need 5 suits. I need 2. And instead of taking multiple books, if I just carried an iPad with me with all my books on it, I can do that. So in that whole process, I got to the point where I have been consolidating my books onto my iPad. And one of the things I love about that is I can highlight and I can make notes in the book. And so a process that I found that works really well for me is whatever I'm reading during the week, I'll go through and I'll highlight. And then Sunday is my review day. So I don't sit down and read something new on Sunday. I go back through everything that I've highlighted or notes that I've made. And that's where I ask myself, okay, now from this, what am I going to do? What I found is my retention has gone through the roof with this process, because I'm active. When you read something and you put it into play or you take a note, you remember it. But if you go back through within a few days of reading it and you review it one more time, your retention significantly goes up. I believe that there were some studies, don't quote me on this, but I think it came out of Germany, where they looked at this process of taking notes, highlighting things, and then reviewing them within the week. And retention of content went up to 75 to 80%. Most people's retention is less than 10% when they read something. And so you make a significant impact on your brain and the way it functions, the way you're able to retain information if you go through this process. And so I absolutely love this process. And it's really helped me to hone in as I've continued to try and evolve my life in multiple areas. The highlight review process is just, it's been phenomenal for me.
Wow, that's great. I think that's a really practical tip and something all of us could do a lot better at. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So you mentioned your career. You have worn many different hats in your professional career. What are some of the leadership principles that have helped you through each of your different positions? And like, regardless of the size of the team, if it was a lot of people versus a smaller team versus even just you and yourself?
I think one of the principles goes back to a book that I read years ago, and this was one that was a really impactful concept in my life. The Arbinger Institute. I'm going to forget the title of the book. Anyway, but the concept is just accepting people as human beings, and I know that sounds really nice and flowery and whatever, but the reality is, when you look at human beings, you either accept them as a human being who has thoughts, feelings, emotions, perspectives, biases, and you just accept them for what they are. The opposite of that is when we objectify another human being. If I'm sitting down with somebody and they say something that I don't like, I can objectify them and call them stupid, or I can call them lazy, or I can call them unintelligent, or maybe I don't like what they said, and so they're this or they're that. And as soon as I put a label on somebody, I'm putting them in a box. When they're in a box, I can continue to treat them like an object, and then I justify. And when I do that, then I go into this mode of self-deception. When I'm self-deceived, then I continue to live life as an asshole, but I justify it because the box that I've put somebody in, the only way that it continues to live is my constant lies that I tell myself and my constant justification. So the way to get out of the box and to stop with the self-deception is just looking at another human being as a human being. And so it doesn't matter if we see eye to eye at the very beginning. It doesn't matter if we have different backgrounds. I believe in accepting people for where they are and not necessarily where I would like them to be. I think that has been crucial to any leadership role that I've been in, and has allowed me to really function in multiple disciplines and across multiple companies and multiple sizes. I mean, I've had teams that are very small, of just 3 or 4 or 5 people, and I've had teams that have been north of 300 to 400 people. And I think that just accepting people where they are, seeing them as human beings, it allows me to lead from a humanistic standpoint, and to not get off base and alienate people.
I definitely saw those principles at work, working with you, underneath you, for the corporation that we worked for. Whenever somebody would have a dispute, they would come and maybe complain to you. And it seems like you would turn around oftentimes and say, like, have you talked to that person? Like, have you tried to understand that person? Have you listened to what that person's saying? And I saw a lot of conflicts get resolved that way.
Yeah, it's amazing when 2 human beings just sit down and talk about, what they feel and then see it from another person's point of view. And we never have to be on the same page in that we see things exactly the same. But we can get on the same page with the fact that we are 2 unique, different human beings that have opinions that matter, have perspectives that matter, and that's okay. That's part of what brings life and zest to what we do. But it's really funny because the simplicity of it is the hardest part to do. It's a very simple process. It's if you have an issue with somebody, you go sit down and you talk about how you feel and what your needs are, and then discuss a strategy for creating a better solution. But most people don't do that. They spend time in their mind coming up with ways to keep somebody in a box and call them names, or they just go talk to other people about what their problem is instead of addressing it head on. And I think when we look at human beings as human beings, the process becomes so much more beautiful, elegant, and simple.
One of my favorite times working with you, fairly early on, we were, directly communicating with each other on a leadership team, and we did a test called StrengthsFinder. And the concept behind it was you find out of, was it 34 or 36 different strengths? It could be you're good with data. It could be you're good communicating. It could be you're a good listener, whatever the strengths were. You find out which your top ones are. And rather than focus on the things you're not that great at, focus on the things you're really, really good at, and then maybe outsource some of those other things that you're not good at to other people who are good at those things. Can you talk about the importance of playing to your strengths rather than trying to always, kind of worry about your weaknesses?
Yeah, it's the bullshit idea in America that we put out there of that we have this, that we should be well-rounded, and that the underdog story is the greatest story. I remember I'm an older guy, and so the movie Rudy might not mean something to a lot of people, but if you ever go watch the movie Rudy, people talk about what an inspirational story it is. And it's horseshit. I mean, it's not an inspirational story. It's a guy who didn't know where his strengths were, but wanted to play on a football team for some stupid reason. And so he got his ass kicked and drilled and, worked hard, and then eventually played in one game with Notre Dame. And somehow we thought that was a great thing to make a movie off of. And it's just bullshit. The reality is, if you understand what your strengths are, you'll get into a flow state in your life so much better. And none of us are going to be great at all things. And so this idea of becoming super well-rounded, A, never happens for most people, and B, is not the best use of our time. I'm not an extremely detail-oriented guy when it comes to data by nature. Now, I can do that, but I'm much more of a big picture vision guy. I do better in that space. And so what I've done over the years is I will hire people that are in that data space, and I lean on them. And what happens is, when you lean into your strengths, you get better at your strengths, and you also get better at your weaknesses, because I can be a big picture guy all day long, but if I don't lean into the fact that I was not a good detail-oriented person, I wouldn't have been a great leader or a manager. I had to get better at that in order to continue on. But by then leaning on somebody who is maybe a more data-oriented person, they then have this great confidence by achieving well in the area that they're good at. And so, the human condition and the human animal is a tribal animal and a tribal condition by its very nature. And we were never designed to live on our own and perform on our own and be on our own. We are tribal in nature. And that means that if I'm going to succeed, it's because I lean into the things that I'm very good at. And I also partner with somebody who, as they say in the military, has my six. Somebody that's got my back, someone that is good in the areas that I'm horrible at. And by doing that, we strengthen together.
I love all of that. Besides the bashing of any sports movie, I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to edit that part out. You can't bash sports movies, Steve. Come on.
Well, I texted you this morning and told you that I didn't like what you guys said on your podcast, where you were saying that life is not about having a great Porsche.
True.
So we're even on
We're
this.
even. Fine. Fair.
The beauty and the aesthetics of a Porsche and the feeling of a Porsche, I have loved all of my Porsches. So
That's amazing.
If people don't give a shit about Porsches, that's great. I love them.
That's amazing. Maybe one day you'll let me drive it. I just upgraded to a Jetta, and I feel like I'm on top of the world. So not a car guy. Not a car guy. No, it's interesting, man. We've got another guest coming on the show named Oliver Berkman, and he wrote the book 4,000 Weeks. And 4,000 weeks is an average lifespan. And it's horrifying. I've already spent half of those. And what do I have to show for it? I don't know. It's really interesting, but it also releases the pressure of what you think you need to accomplish in your life. Because if you've got 4,000 weeks on average, you're not owed that. Also, an anvil could fall on my head right now. You have a limited amount of time and resource to do anything in this world. You're not going to make, the pyramids. You're not going to create this thing that, everybody's going to, have and you're not going to live on in the ages. So what that does is it allows you to say okay, I can't do everything. I can't make this grand legacy that's going to live on forever. I can choose a few things and I can do them and get them done. And that will be my contribution to the planet. And that's kind of it. And I love how you mentioned, with the strengths, play to your own and involve other people to help work together to accomplish something that is far greater than what you could accomplish alone, because you don't have the time or resources or gifts to be good at all of it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about all the great things that we have today, the things that we're blessed with, that make our life better and easier. The technology that we have, the ability to do what the hell we're doing now, right? You and I are in two totally different places, talking to each other. This would have never happened 50 years ago. This would have never happened 100 years ago. But it was the tribalness of all of these smart people that came together to create ideas and build technology that allow us to connect through the internet today. And we're having a conversation on the backs of all of these amazing people that have created something. Now, nobody knows who the first person, I say nobody. I don't know who the first person was that created the microchip. I don't know who the first person was that created the semiconductor. I don't know who the first person was that figured out how to put an image on a screen. We don't know those people's individual legacies, but we are the beneficiaries of all of their combined wisdom and work. And I think at the end of the day, that's the beauty of it. And if we just get out of our own way, one of the things that I tell people, and it shocks them and pisses them off at first, but I'm okay with that, because if you sit with this idea, then you'll actually realize that going back to what you were talking about with the 4,000 weeks is we're not that important. The reality is when I die, I'm sure there will be a small group of people that will mourn me for a day or two. When I die, there will be an even smaller group of people that will remember me a year or 5 years later. But you fast forward 20 or 30 years, nobody's going to give a shit or remember who I was, what I did. And, you go 100 years, I might have a picture somewhere in a drawer. I don't even think we'll have drawers at that point. So maybe not even that. But, my life is not going to be that super important. And I think far too often people don't progress because they're so self-conscious. Oh, what is this person going to think? And it's like, nobody fucking cares. Like, don't hone in on that because you're not that important. I'm not that important. Like, you and I create podcasts and we create content. And every once in a while, I'm like, Casey, I'm frustrated because the downloads aren't there. And you're like, yeah, but you got, X number of people listening. I'm like, yeah, that's true. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Because if we're enjoying the process, if we love what we're doing, that's probably the most important thing. And if we lean into our strengths, we're happier. We tend to contribute better to the world. And I think there's a lot of beauty and wisdom in that.
I love that, man. And great segue to the next question, which is about the podcast. The Evolve podcast is absolutely fantastic. Definitely, one of the world's greatest because it has the greatest guests, which I'm saying with a little bit of bias because I was a guest.
You've been on a few times. Yeah.
It's been great. I've loved every opportunity to chat. And again, it's one of the few that I've never missed an episode. I really like it. So I want to know, in what ways has podcasting enhanced your life?
Well, I think a lot of different ways. I've been really fortunate to know amazing people in my life. If there is one thing that I value more than anything, it's the fact that I have relationships and friendships with so many just unbelievable people. And because of that, I also have realized that when I started the podcast, that a lot of these people that I know, I don't know all of their stories. I don't know all of the cool things that they've done. I mean, case in point, Bill Crawley, who was one of our first few episodes, Bill and I were just talking one day, and I was asking Bill for some advice. He's an entrepreneur and an inventor, and I knew one of the products that he had invented because we used it in the gym. And then we get to talking and he starts telling me a story about his first company and his first invention. And I looked at him and like, my jaw is dropping. I'm like, what was that called? And he tells me, oh, it was Vortex backpacks. I'm like, holy shit. We loved your stuff. Like, I had no idea that all of my friends growing up loved the Vortex backpacks, and Bill was the inventor of that. And so I think what podcasting has done is it's allowed me to go deep. It gives me an excuse to have a deep conversation with people that I already love and know, but it also gives me an excuse to have conversations with people that I think might be interesting. And then we have those conversations and I'm like, wow, that is super, super cool. So podcasting has been really, it's just expanded my addiction, I guess you could say, for conversation, my addiction for learning about people, and my addiction for collecting friends. I love having a lot of friends and a lot of contacts and a lot of people. Like you, I'm a fairly introspective person, and I'm very selective about the people that I regularly spend time in my life with. But with that, I really enjoy the spider web of having multiple really interesting people in my life.
That's a very well thought answer. I think you and Miles do a fantastic job with that and presenting people's stories and asking interesting questions that elicits those kinds of responses. And I get feel like I'm in the room with you learning about these people too. So you guys do such a great job with that. I really love it. Gonna switch kind of topics a little bit. You are somebody who loves to be outside in nature, and with your house being so close to the mountains, you have the opportunity to get out several times a week from what I can see, at least on social media. Why is getting out into nature so important to you? And what lessons have you learned from connecting with the earth and being outside?
Well, I think it's everything. I mean, at the end of the day, nature is where we learn what the reality of life is. There's so many people want to McDonald's their life. And what I mean by that is they want to get in shape really quick. And so, you can go through the McDonald's drive-through, and by the time you're finished paying, they've already got the bag of shit hanging out the window, and you can just drive up and get the flaming bag of shit and put it in your mouth. And you could, within less than a minute and a half, you could order, pay, and start making diarrhea from that crap. And it's unbelievable. And so that's our life these days. And so we want everything to be as fast as what McDonald's is. Nature doesn't do that. Nature teaches us that there is a rhythm to life. The seasonality teaches us that we will go through different seasons of life. There's accumulation, there's drop-offs, there's cold, there's wind. Like, that's life. I mean, the reality of life is that it mimics nature. If you want to grow in any area of life, let's say you want to get better at managing your finances, you can't McDonald's that stuff. You have to, over time, figure out how to discipline yourself to invest your money in the right areas so that it grows. And then you learn the compound, or the power of compounding interest, which is probably the most powerful thing in the entire universe, is the power of compounding interest. And you learn that in nature. The other thing too is it's very grounding. You know, it was had a beautiful moment recently. My daughter came to me and she said, "Dad, can I read you my entrance exam, or my entrance essay for school?" And she starts reading this story. The question was, what's a moment in time where it really made an impact on, or something happened that made an impact on your life? And so she starts telling about a time where her best friend at the time, was upset with her, wouldn't talk to her. I think they were young teenagers. And she was going through that typical adolescent time where there was a lot of insecurities, and she was not as confident and bold as what she was when she was younger. And I said, "Okay, let's go talk." And we hopped in the car and we went for a hike. And we went up to a place where we could have a good vantage point of what where the sunset was going down. And we sat on this rock and we talked. And I said, "I want you to sit here. I want you to feel the rock. I want you to feel the wind. I want you to feel the rhythm of nature. And I want you to feel how it can influence your emotion and push your soul one way or another." And at the time, she says in her essay, she didn't really understand it. Part of it was, what was going on in her mind is, why is my dad making me sit here? And the rock is cold. And what happened, though, is in reflecting on that, she said she learned that the statement that I made to her of nature is the place where you will find the greatest peace, because it's the most in rhythm with what reality is, that she's learned that. And if she ever gets feeling frustrated, sad, lonely, depressed, she goes into nature and she regrounds herself. And so for me, nature is everything. It's it's the way to connect. That's where I don't go to church. I don't go into a building. I stopped doing that about 15 plus years ago because I found that I am a much more spiritual human being by getting out into nature. It teaches me everything. It grounds me, and nature's got some of the best stories for me. I mean, the dumbest things I've done are in nature, and the best stories I've done are in nature. I mean, I had a friend once where I convinced him to come and run and jump into a lake with me, and still tells that story to this day.
Run and jump in a lake. Okay, so for the listener, this is a frozen lake in December or late November. We're sitting around in a cabin. Steve's like, "Hey, let's go jump into this frozen lake." And I'm like, "Okay, that's really funny." But he was serious. And run and jump in a lake denotes that you would actually run and hurl yourself into a lake. But what actually happened is, walking towards the lake, we kind of got stuck in this freezing cold mud and could hardly move. And yeah, that was pretty embarrassing.
Up to our knees, yeah.
That was a mess.
Well, I thought it was a great idea. And it was dark. We'd been sitting in the cabin. We were warm. And I was like, "Hey, let's just go jump in the lake. That'd be cool." And I know you thought I was crazy. We get out there. I think we both stripped down to our underwear. Our wives are thinking that we're crazy. We run out. And then the next thing we know, we're almost like knee deep or not deep. The mud. We have to get out of the mud. And so then I'm like, "All right, well, let's go jump off of the the doc over there, you looked at me and you're like, yeah, fuck you, buddy.
That's
So
exactly what I said.
Yeah.
Wow.
But nature teaches a lot, right? And it creates a lot of these great stories, some fun, some scary, and most stupid. But those are the ones you remember.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you mentioned the kind of patience, and like you can't force nature to do its thing. You can't make a flower bloom. You can't make a tree lose all its leaves all at once. It's something that just has to happen, and you have to be in rhythm with it rather than trying to mold it the way that you think it should be. I think that's a really good and thoughtful point. You've already mentioned the kiddos, and you have 3 of them, and one of which you delivered yourself into this world. I'm curious what lessons your children have ended up teaching you.
Well, a lot. I think that, it probably the most important thing is that you never know, you can never master one thing and just do it over and over and over and over again. Life constantly is a challenge. When I was when they were all younger, I was the greatest guy in the world. I could make the best fart jokes or whatever it was and make them all laugh, and I could get them all on my lap and give them hugs and kisses and tell them all the things that they were great at. And I was like the greatest, most fun, but would teach it was awesome. And then they got older, and the stuff that dad does is stupid and embarrassing and funny. And I was like, okay, now I got to shift how I do things. I got to change. So I think one of the most important things that being a dad has taught me is this idea of evolution and reinvention. I can't just walk in and joke around and do things the way I did. And they think that I'm the greatest in the world. Now it's different conversations. It's different ways of connecting. And I think that's probably the most important thing is that if I'm not growing and if I'm not expanding and I'm not gauging back and forth on how's this relationship going, that we're not progressing, we're not moving forward. So I can never stop evolving, and I can never stop reinventing myself in that way. And that's really helped me in every other aspect of life, because we all get stale in certain things. And if you get stale as a dad, then you lose touch pretty quick. And I can't lose touch. Mm. It's not acceptable for me.
Mm. I love that you mentioned, evolving, and that's the name of your brand, Evolve. And another word that you mentioned quite a bit is disrupt. And oftentimes in our path, we know that we're heading in the right direction until something disrupts us, and it forces us to rethink things. And it really kind of takes us off the path that we had thought, to ourselves that was the right direction. And, in hindsight, it turns out that whatever other thing we were called to do turns out to be the right way. And we normally can look back on it and say like, yeah, this was a good thing because now I'm doing this, I've accomplished this. So I want to know one thing in your life that you thought was a terrible disruption that ended up leading to an evolution and a progression for you.
Yeah, I would say, well, there's been several. I don't want to give the pat answer of the pandemic, because I think that one has become pretty fairly trite nowadays, because the pandemic disrupted everybody. I think one of the biggest ones for me was when I was 2 years old. My mom walked into the room and she found me no heartbeat. I wasn't breathing, and she had to do CPR to revive me. And at that point, they had no idea what was wrong with me, and I spent the better part of a year or two in and out of the hospital. I think that was a disruption in many areas. I mean, my dad told me later on, he said that was the thing that, he goes, that changed my life, because I thought, if I could lose a kid, what type of man do I want to be? And I think it really changed him. But it was a huge disruption for me, because it made me realize that, my mom gave me life once when she gave birth to me, but then she gave me life twice by bringing me back. And if I was going to die again, I got to choose what I do between now and then. And so, that was something that I just with the 4,000 week concept, life is finite. And so I always say I've already died once. And when it happens again, I need to make sure that I've written my life on my own terms. So I tend to be fairly driven with goals and objectives and things that I want to accomplish in life because I don't know, maybe like you said, maybe an anvil gets dropped on my head today. Maybe get hit by a car on the way home tonight and I die, and whatever that's going to look like. Or maybe I'm an old man sitting on a rocking chair at 110 years old. But between now and whenever that bell rings, I got to make sure that everything in my life is on point. So I think disruptions are good. Disruptions bring us face to face with who we are. They bring us face to face with what's inside of us. And they really open up the heart to something that is, where we realize that when you brush away all the bullshit, all you're left with is what matters. And disruption does that. And I would say that was probably the first disruption. It took me a few years, obviously. I didn't at 4 or 5 years old say, well, I stopped breathing and my heart stopped. And so now I'm living my life with purpose. But that is definitely a disruption that has sat with me for quite some time.
Well, it's interesting. The CPR thing has certainly been a theme in your life. As a general manager of a club, you've been called upon several times to administer CPR. And, some people made it and survived, and other people did not make it. And I want to know how those experiences impacted you. And I also want to know, as far as the impact on you, what did each result have in common with each other?
Yeah, great questions. I think what they all had in common was just this respect for the sanctity of life. We all want to be a looky-loo in a situation that might be traumatic or challenging, and we want to see what's going on. And one of the things that was most important for me is when we had a situation where we needed to dive in and do CPR and try and save this life. There was a sanctity there that I just thought we need to protect. And I was very adamant and militant about how we did what we did. And there always had to be the human curtain. People needed to turn their backs and create a wall around us so that people couldn't see what we were doing while we were working on this human being. I think that, with each one, it was a little bit different. The first guy that died on me, I think that changed me fairly significantly because you got me on this one, Case. That had never happened before. I've lost in life and I've lost people, but those two things have never been together. I'd failed and I've lost people, but I had never lost somebody because we didn't make it. And so that I think really changed my perspective and probably brought some of the most, the highest sense of loss to me, because I saw it at the time as a failure on my part and a loss of a human being. And that took me a long time to process through. I don't think I slept for probably 6 months after that, longer than maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time. And there were a lot of things about that personally that were challenging for me. But then there was also a sense of indignation because the man, when he had the heart attack and went down, there were 2 people that had seen him and got to him first and then walked away. And that just never made any sense to me. I just thought, how could you do that? How could you walk away from a man that was dying? And even if you don't know what the hell you're doing, like jump in. And so that took me some time to process through. And that I think it changed me. And it really just got me to the point where I had a greater reverence for life and humans. But I also kind of came to that sense of where, like I said, accept people for where they are, because frankly, there are cowards, there are pathetic people in this world that won't dive in, and I will accept them for where they're at. And I choose not to live in that space. I think that the next one that we had where we were able to save him, there were a lot of things that came out of that particular situation. One was teamwork, because it was really, there were 3 or 4 of us that made a big impact in that situation that caused him to then be transferred. And then 3 or 4 of us then became a group of paramedics and doctors who did so many other things to save him. And again, when I go back to this sanctity of life, when he came walking back into the space, man, I'll never forget that feeling, because I had not seen him since breaking his ribs and pounding on his chest. And that sanctity of life was just another thing that got deep into my soul. And when I saw I'll never forget the eyes of his daughter when she thanked us and told us how great it was to have her dad. And then when she got married, the messages, the pictures that she sent saying, I'm so glad my dad is here for this. It just, that's something that doubled down on the sanctity of life. I think the other thing that all of those experiences did for me was it became a testing ground. I've always wanted to ask myself, I guess, what would I do in really tough or really challenging situations? Would I be the person that looked at it and ran away, or would I be the person that ran towards it? And, I'm happy to say that I'm dumb enough that I'm always the guy that runs towards it. And I think that's one of the things that it helped me to realize about myself, that I'm not going to back down from that. And I use that in every aspect of life. If I have to have a tough conversation, I go directly into it. I take a very direct approach, but at the same time, try and take into everything I do a sense of sanctity for the human being and love for them. And I would say the last thing, and I know I'm kind of going on this, and you're probably like, dude, shut the hell up. But I think the last thing is that there's a role for violence in our lives. And, anyone that has not been in a situation of doing CPR and putting the pads on and shocking somebody and seeing everything that goes on, it's a violent thing. Saving a life is a violent thing. I still to this day can hear, not just in my ears, but in my bones, I can hear and feel the violence of what it feels like to do CPR, to hear all of the things, to feel the breaking of the bones, see the shocking of the body when that happens. And violence is not a bad thing. Violence, the wind is violent, the rain is violent. But it's just a matter of how violence is used. And violence used the right way can be one of the most beautiful, life-saving things. So I think that's another thing that it's taught me, is how everything in life can be beautiful, and everything from those tender moments to the violent moments have beauty, and they have a place in our life.
Mm. Well, I didn't prepare you for that question. I didn't tell you that I was going to ask it. And I knew very well how, personal and kind of I don't know. I don't know if horrible is the right term to use, because I know it's also a teacher. But I really appreciate that really very meaningful and thoughtful answer from you. It is an emotional thing. One of the things I took from you is, you and I used to kind of joke around, and I would be the one that an emergency would happen. I would run away. I would be the one under the stairs. And through, your example, I learned to run side by side with you. I remember the last one that we had that we ended up losing the guy, but I was running with you, and we were running towards the situation. Last year during the pandemic, somebody was on the side of the road, and I pulled the fuck off the road to go help that person running towards them. And I really took that from you. So for that, I'm really appreciative. And it is interesting to understand that about yourself and prove to yourself that you can do that. What is the one thing in life you are the most proud of?
I think my failures. I'm really proud that I've fucked up a lot. I think that I'd be lying if I said that it was every success or it was this or that. I'm really proud of the fact that I have made a shit ton of mistakes, and I'm proud of the fact that I have, and that I'm still here. And I'm proud of the fact that, because what's happened is, the only person in the world that has never been criticized is probably a person that works at a gas station, pumping gas, or maybe just, never, or a librarian, somebody that, and I'm not knocking gas attendants or librarians, but it's the person who never gets criticized is the person who never takes a risk and who never puts themselves out there. And so I think the thing that I am most proud of is the fact that I have screwed up so many times, and I have made so many mistakes. I've been misunderstood. I have been, I've fucked up so many times that just I've learned from them. And I think that's what I'm most proud of, is all of my screw ups and all of my mistakes, because without those, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to grow.
I love that answer. I absolutely love that answer. Thank you for that. I want to know, in this life, we've talked a lot about life and death. We're going to have things that we finish and succeed at and can put away. And we have other things that we're going to have to pass the torch to somebody. And I want to know one project that you feel like you would love to see through to the completion, and one project that you would like to leave unfinished for somebody else to, pick up the torch and continue with it.
That's a great question. I would say the one project that I want to, I don't even know if I would call it a project, it's more of a mantra that I want to make sure that I pass the torch on is, for years I've taught coaching and leadership concepts, both in business and lecturing to groups and, on the podcast or my old radio show or whatever. Something dawned on me one day that if you see yourself as a coach, that means you're a coach all the time. If you call yourself a coach, but you don't coach all the time, you're not a coach. You think about a football team. The coach is the coach, which means that the coach is reviewing game film on the times when he or she is not on the sidelines. The coach is the coach when the players need him or her to be there. The coach is the coach that stands on the sidelines and coaches while the players play. And I see myself as a coach and a leader always, which means that my job is to constantly look to improve whatever is happening around me and to make everybody else, including myself, better. And so, again, I don't think it's a project as much as it is a mantra that I want to pass on to anyone that will listen, that you just never stop, because whatever you do, whatever I do in my life, concepts, example, teachings that I have that I could pass on, I want that to continue. I do have a personal mission or a vision for my life that I need to, before I die, help millions of people transform their lives in some positive way. And I probably won't do that before I die, if I'm being completely honest. But if I can help, let's say, a few 100,000, and then those people then go help others, then at some point we'll reach that millions of people range. And so that's a big thing that I would say I want to really pass on. As far as completion, that one's a tough one for me now, because I don't really look at life in terms of specifically what can I complete. I think that I used to set really big goals, and now I just set goals that are in a smaller realm and more so of like habits that I want to create. And then, what can I accomplish in fairly short periods of time? And the reason I do that is I remember years and years ago thinking, oh my gosh, I would love to own a Porsche, because I've always loved Porsches since I was a little kid. And so then when I bought one and I drove it for 5 or 6 years, I was like, this is awesome, but I want this other model. And so then I sold that and I bought the other model. And I think at this point now I've owned, I don't know, 7 or 8, and I've got another one that I want to buy soon. And so I don't really look at life as this like ultimate, this is what I want to get to, or this is a project I want to finish, or I want to accomplish this one thing. Because I just think that life is a constant evolutionary process. And as soon as I achieve something, I'm excited to go on to the next thing. That's what juices me up, turns me on, and gets me going in life is what's the next exciting thing? What's the next moment? What's the next thing that I can really get immersed in and enjoy life in?
That's a great answer. I love that. I sometimes come up with my own questions for the podcast, and sometimes I steal from others, and I am unapologetic about that. This is a question that I have stolen from you. In a sentence or less, what is a way that you evolve your life? And in a sentence or less, what is a way that you disrupt your life?
How I've evolved is making a lot of mistakes and then learning from them. The way that I disrupt my life is by staying consistent with a routine, but then also leaning in when things start to feel discomfort. I feel discomfort if things feel uncomfortable.
Great answers. Tell us how people can work with you. In what way are you coaching and consulting with people these days?
Well, as far as coaching goes, I only take a very limited amount of people on. And so, if they want to get a hold of me for coaching, we can talk about it. I generally only work with a few people that are highly motivated. And the majority of what people can learn, they can learn from the podcast or old blogs or things like that. And so there's no value to me working with people one-on-one unless people really need something. So I'd say the easiest ways to get a hold of me would be on my Instagram. It's just Steve Cutler with an underscore at the end, or evolve_cast on Instagram. Our website is evolve-cast.com. And yeah, the podcast is on all of the major platforms. It's called the Evolve Podcast. So that's probably the easiest way.
Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. What is one simple tip you would like the listener to take from this conversation and apply into their lives?
I think probably the most important tip is get into a regular routine of sleep, movement, and what you put into your mouth. If you sleep consistently over time, you change the way that your brain functions. If you move your body every single day, you improve your biochemistry. And if you are very conscious of what goes in the mouth, you're going to make a significant impact in all areas of life. Most grumpy, sad, and pathetic people that I know overdo it on carbohydrates and sugars, and they sleep like shit, and then they make excuses and they don't move on a regular basis. So the one simple tip is create a routine that works for you in those 3 areas.
Fantastic. That is tremendous advice. Steve Cutler, one more time, can you tell people where they can find you and connect with you and your work?
Yep. So it's Steve Cutler _ on Instagram, or evolve_cast on Instagram, or you can get a link to all of our episodes and learn more about the business at evolve-cast.com.
Excellent. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Steve, for all of the conversations that you and I have had over the years, I still so much appreciate talking to you and learning from you and transferring ideas. I would say that I kind of expected, a certain way this podcast would go, and it evolved while we were doing it. And I really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability and all the lessons that you have taught me through my career and in this podcast. So thank you so very much for everything that you do. And thank you for making the time to come on our show today. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure, not only to be on, but to call you one of my great friends.
Well, you are definitely one of my great friends as well. I think it's an honor. Even though we lost McDonald's, gas stations, and libraries as potential sponsors of the show today, we love the content. Otherwise, we'll try to find a sponsor somewhere else. And thank you again so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.